Thank you all so much for coming today. This is super exciting. I am going to go to full screen and I'm going to move or I think I'm going to, hold on. Yep. Remedial Zoom time. Move that over there. Okay. And here we are. Okay. So Karen came up with the title of this webinar, How Not to Kill Your Plants. We have garden goals, people. We've got garden goals.
Right.
They don't always work out, but we have them. So then we have our little introductions. Karen, I will, I know you want to tell the story of our meeting in the back of the class.
Yes. Yeah. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. And I want to thank Amy for agreeing to do this with me. So for those of you that I don't know, my name's Karen Koutsavlis, and I run a business called NE360Fitness. I do primarily corporate wellness coaching and some personal training for people. I completely 100% believe in practical solutions for a healthy lifestyle, nothing crazy. And I think that if there's no element of fun in what you're doing, then it might not really be worth spending the time on it. And I think it's fun to take the knowledge from my friends like Amy and share that with everyone I know. And being that it's spring and we're thinking about gardening, I thought Amy, who is also a cookbook author, know me, you know I don't really cook from cookbooks. I collect them, but this is one that I do like to cook from. And I was actually looking, one of your favorite recipes isn't even, or one of my favorite recipes of yours isn't in here, the lemon blueberry coffee cake.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that is over on the tinyfarmhouse.com blog, which I have my two digital lives are not merged in any way. So I have the amymccoy.com site and then the tinyfarmhouse.com site. And that's I've made it confusing for everyone, but the recipes are on tinyfarmhouse.com. So there are a bunch there that you can still grab.
We'll share it.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, continue.
So Amy and I met, I'm going to try and make this brief. Basically about, I think it's 13 years ago now, Amy and I were both enrolled in a cheese studies course at Boston University, which is just really fun to say. And it's not just that we met in class, we met, I think, the second class because we realized that in each class we tasted 12 cheeses and they were all paired with wine or beer. And we noticed that everything made its way to the back of the room. So in class number 2, all the seats were open and me and Amy were sitting in the back table waiting for everything to come to us. So if there was something we liked, we could have extra. I also learned very quickly to not drive to the class and ride my bike because getting home was not
yeah.
So from there, our friendship was born and we've stayed in touch pretty regularly since then. And in fact, with all of Amy's cooking know-how and growing, I visited her tiny farmhouse when I was 7 months pregnant, and we canned probably the best pickles in the world. So assuming you all love today's webinar or Zoom call, I guess they're technically different. We're going to do this again with all the vegetables you guys grow this spring and summer, and we're going to show you how to can them and preserve them and make some really yummy treats with everything. Because that would be the practical side of applying what you learn. So as always, I like to keep these kind of casual. If you have questions, please use the chat feature or you can unmute yourself. We are recording this so that all this information we can share with you guys afterwards. Take notes, ask questions, and most importantly, have some fun. So thank you guys for being here. I'm going to let Amy take over because this is my contribution to gardening, which you know about. That's about it.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you everyone for coming. For those of you who don't know me, Karen has done a very good job of introducing me. I did write a cookbook. It came out in 2010, so it's been quite a while. But that food is still totally relevant. You can still make it now. I also, I have a line of cute and cheerful home goods and note cards and notebooks that I sell at amymccoy.com. And those are all really inspired by sort of a sense of fun, but also my love of gardening and of nature. So that's where that all of that inspiration comes from. So you can find us, Karen and I, both at our respective sites and on Instagram. And without further ado, we're gonna get right into it. So this is a basics level course. We're gonna just try to cover a high level of different things. And we are going to, Angela, I know you wanted to talk about tomatoes. So we do have some tomatoes at the very back end of the webinar or a Zoom call. All right, so why garden? First of all, you get to grow your own delicious food. It's amazing. So in this presentation, I have a little picture of some okra seeds, and they're from Japan. And like, you're not gonna find that at the grocery store, right? So it's like interesting varieties, things you wouldn't be able to find elsewhere. You get a pretty landscape out of it. You also know where your food is coming from, which is a nice feature. You also, as if any of you grow zucchini, you already know you have a plentitude of food, more than you can even handle sometimes, that you need to share. For us, we grow, like we're just about to get into harvesting asparagus here, and we get about a pound of asparagus a day. So that's great, and that lasts for 6 weeks. So by the end of 6 weeks, we're kind of all done with asparagus, but we're able to grow it in our own yard. Obviously, it saves a bunch of money because asparagus is expensive. And every day we're having this delicious, fresh, sweet asparagus. So, or tomatoes when we get to the end of July and August. It's just, I'm very geeky about this because I get very excited about my garden and all the food that's out there. Cut flowers are another thing. Like you'll see some pictures in here. Like I have a thing about zinnia and also sunflowers. So that's just a nice thing to have. Actually, I don't know if you can see, I've got daffodils in the back we have over 1,000 daffodils here. We plant like 100 bulbs a year. So we've been doing this since 2010. So we have over 1,000 bulbs, and I've cut already about 160 stems, and you wouldn't be able to tell that anything's missing here. Okay. Oh, look, I can actually do this. I can do 2 things at once, I think. Sorry guys, hang on. Admit. Will it work? Sorry guys, pause. There we go. I think it worked. I think Barbara's here. Okay, so another important thing, because we are in Earth Week, any planting really does help to do a little bit of our part to help control CO2. So obviously trees are going to be the biggest benefit to us to removing CO2 from the air, from the environment. However, even little tiny plants play a role. So if you just have some herbs on your windowsill, or on your deck or whatever, on your back porch, that's still gonna help. Like a peony type shrub with really deep root systems, those help a lot too. So you're doing your part, you're making things green, you're actually helping the environment. And like I said, so many exclamation points for why gardening. So getting started, I did want to talk very quickly about, things that are helpful to have. You don't need a ton of stuff, and you can make do a lot as well. And you'll see some pictures in here of us making do, especially now because there's been a lot of rush to buy seeds, starting supplies. It's a little bit tougher because everyone's been at home and everyone's interested in gardening at this point in time. But I do think a few things that are helpful to have, like garden gloves. It's also nice to have a basic set of tools. So just a trowel, like a little shovel, a little hand tiller that has like 3 prongs on it, a hand hoe or a weeder that just will be able to rip out the weeds, and then snips or shears. I use kitchen shears a lot. It's easy enough. Obviously, you should have a watering can or a hose with an adjustable spray nozzle. You want to be able to give gentle water to your plants. You definitely want sunscreen. That's a lesson that I think we've all probably learned at one time or another, when you're bent over a garden bed and all of a sudden you're like, oh, my shoulders are completely burnt. Great. Some closed-toed shoes or waterproof clogs, because you want to protect your feet. You don't want to get cuts on your feet when you're in the garden, and that can happen. And then also, I think it's good to have a notebook as you're starting out, because you want to be able to record what's happening in your garden. Like for me, I've been gardening now for 24 years. So I know like I know when I start my tomatoes, I know that I'm going to get my first tomato on like July 29th, roughly. Like I know for the asparagus, like I know that they come right around the 21st of April. every year. Like I know, for instance, poppies that grow in my yard, June 1, that's when they come up. So you start to know that stuff, but when you're getting started, it's nice to be able to keep a record of it. And then you're like, oh, that did happen last year on June 1, and then you start to get used to it. Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk about basics. We're going to talk about annuals versus perennials, soil types, which we're going to sort of breeze over a little bit because that's a very deep subject. Planting zones, and then watering, because watering is a challenging topic. I know I get a lot of calls from my brothers when they're trying to grow things. They're like, what do I do now? So we'll discuss that. So annuals and perennials, really the annuals are going to have a lifespan of the one season. And it also depends on your zone. So up here in the north, we have some plants that could be considered tender perennials down south, but they aren't going to make it here. Generally speaking, your vegetables, your tomatoes, and your zucchinis, your summer squashes, those are not going to come back. So I've had that question before too, like, okay, so now my tomato is all done. It looks like it's all spent. Is it going to come back next year? It is not coming back next year. So you do need to plant that again. Asparagus is a perennial vegetable, as discussed. So we've had this bed of asparagus here. These are what asparagus look like coming out of the ground. A lot of times, sometimes people don't know that this is how it actually looks when it comes out of the ground. So that is what it looks like, but that has a lifespan too. That might only go 10 or 20 years, depending on the health of your soil, the health of your crowns. And a lot of fruits are perennials. So fruit trees, strawberries, blueberries, apples, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so soil. And here's some of our asparagus also, with a lot of compost over top. So, it does look like a mess. So this soil does look like a mess because in this particular case, this bed, we're not able to till it over. So normally you would add compost and then you would work it into the soil because the crowns are already underneath because this is a perennial. We're not able to do that here, but we're very fortunate. We do have very loamy soil here at our house. And we also have compost because we have chickens. So we let the chicken waste, the chicken manure, ferment for a long time. We have compost also from vegetable scraps and fruit scraps and leaves and grass clippings. But it is important to know what your soil type is. So like if you're on the Cape, you're gonna have a sandy soil. And it sort of helps to know what you need to do to amend your soil in order to figure out what can grow there successfully. Like if you have a clayey soil, you still might do pretty well with your vegetables and other perennials, but you just want to know like what it is that you need to do to amend it. So this is beyond the scope of this one call. So I do think that if you went to look, the Royal Horticultural Society, I really love their site and I love their publications, and they're just the Brits, they're very good at gardening. So anyway, they have some good advice. This is going to be also in the resources page of this talk. Amending with compost is also helpful. That's another whole topic that we could discuss for quite a while. And you can have your soil analyzed at your county extension. Right now during COVID, there is a one down the Cape. There are different more regional soil testing agencies, but at this point in time, a lot of people are sending them to their main extension. So that might be for instance, in Massachusetts, it's UMass. In New Hampshire, it's UNH. Then there's a whole big list that I have a link to at the back of this in the resources. So we'll be able to share that. This is your hardiness zone map. So for me, I live in zone 6B. There's a link to this also, but this determines like what you can grow successfully. So for instance, the okra that I was talking about. Okra is typically a southern plant associated with the south anyway. And that's because it likes a temperature of 75 to 90 degrees during growing season. So that can be a little tougher as you get further north, right? Like if you're in Maine somewhere, you might not have that much success with okra. Or for instance, peppers really like to be hot. Coriander doesn't want to be, actually coriander, this is odd, but coriander does not, it goes to seed after about 70 degrees. Once you get a sustained 70-degree temperature, it's going to go to seed, it bolts. Lettuce does the same. So it's just good to know like what you can grow in your zone based on the temperatures that you're working with. So this is my watering situation here. This is my pansy that is on my front porch. This is yesterday morning. Your plants are definitely going to let you know when they need water or when they don't need water. So if they start looking yellow, if the leaves start looking yellow, then you've overwatered them most likely. Or if you get a ton of rain and all of a sudden you notice like, oh, my tomato plants start to like the edges of the leaves are looking very yellow. Speaking of which, it's starting to downpour here. But then also, if you don't give them enough water, this is, I think, when people get really like freaked out, like, oh, I'm not good with plants. I've been gardening for 24 years, and this is what happened yesterday morning here. This poor little guy, I put him in a little tiny pot, and he didn't get water for a couple of days, and so he drooped. And I was like, oh, well, he needs water. And then an hour later, he's back. He's, alive, not dead, not killed. So this is also when you plant in containers, like if you have flowers in containers outside, you need to water those more frequently than you do anything that's planted in the ground. In the ground, plants are able to draw more moisture and nutrients from the soil around them. Also, like if you have hanging baskets, the wind will affect the dryness of the pot. So you just need to keep an eye on that. For my hanging baskets I have on the front of my house, I usually give them about a gallon of water each every other day. So, and those are like a 14-inch basket. And that keeps them going until like October, from May to October. Also, plants should be watered at their base. So, and my husband and I have this conversation all the time. I always catch him top watering. And I'm like, stop top watering in the plants. He's like, it's the same as rain. I'm like, well, rain is soaking. And when you were just watering with your watering can, if you're just putting it on top, it's like sort of dripping off the sides. You need to get to the roots. So that's why you want to always water as close as you can to the base of the plant. And I will continue to be having that discussion with him probably for the rest of our entire lives, because he still doesn't want to accept it. When plants are first planted in the ground, you want to make sure to water them every 2 to 3 days until they're established. If it's particularly hot, you're going to need to water them more frequently. You need to look for that telltale sign, whether things are getting droopy or whether they are starting to look like a little yellowy, back off the watering, or if they're droopy, water more. When you plant seeds, you do want to water regularly. And I know everyone hates the word moist, but we're using it in this context. So you want to keep the soil evenly moist. And then once you start to see the sprouts, then you can move into that 2 to 3 days, making sure that they don't look like they're drooping. Okay, so seed starting and plant buying. Planning your garden, which is very important. And then garden maintenance. I actually think this is a very important point because I think a lot of people think, I don't have time to garden. Like I can't be dealing with all that work all the time. And for me, what I used to actually do it like, oh, I need to do everything on Saturday. It's going to be like, I have to get all my weeding done. I have to do this, I have to do that. And I finally realized if I just go out there every evening for like 20 minutes, actually, I think this speaks to Karen's philosophy too. Make activity fun, right? So it's just 20 minutes, you're outdoors, you go out there, you're like, okay, there are pests on my zucchini, I gotta pick those off. I have to do some weeding around the tomatoes. And you just do a little bit each night. Or if you don't wanna be out there every night, every other night. But you can definitely, it's totally doable. You don't need to be booking off all of Saturday during the summer to like take care of your garden. So seed starting, these are some seed starting trays that I do recommend using. I have used a lot of different things to start seeds in the past. I've used like Chobani cups with holes poked in the bottom. I've used little tins, like bean tins washed out and then holes poked in the bottom. But if you can get seed starting trays, it's always a good thing. This is zinnia is the bigger part of this, and then that's hollyhock on the screen left. And then this is that okra pack we've been talking about. So this is another thing. You will get instructions on your seed pack for what it's going to require to get those seeds started. So for these, it says in the part that's not very legible because it's sideways, it says you want to soak those seeds before you start. They'll sprout in 7 to 14 days. You see the ideal temp of 75 to 90 degrees. They want to be an ½ inch to an inch deep. There's another thing, like when you are planting seeds, you can sort of tell how much depth they need because like poppy seeds are literally the poppy seeds that you get in your baked goods. I wouldn't plant those. Those are not necessarily specifically for planting, but they're that size. So they're like you just sort of scatter them on top of the soil and lightly cover them. A zucchini seed, you're going to go an inch in because it's a bigger seed. So that's just sort of a way to look at it when you're looking at seed size. You're like, oh, this thing doesn't want to be that deep in the ground because it's tiny and it's not going to find its way up. And this will give you the plant spacing. It obviously says it's not frost hardy, so this is an annual, and it has to have full sun for 8 to 12 hours. Okay. So you do want, like I'm saying, seed starting trays. I'm gonna just hold this up. These are my zinnia, or some of my zinnia. So this is a seed starting tray. I've got its plastic lid underneath it. It has a capillary mat underneath it because when you are starting seeds, it's good to have the water come from the bottom, not from the top. Then also, this is another conversation we have here a lot about soil from the garden because we have nice soil. My husband's like, you don't need to get seed starting mix, but because sometimes the finer seeds they'll rot in your garden soil, it is nicer to get a lighter weight seed starting soil that is specific for that. So that's a purchase. The dome plastic lid keeps them nice and warm, like a little greenhouse until they sprout. And then a table or a south-facing window to keep the seed starts on. These are some in my house. This is last year. This was those are sweet peas that the woodchuck ate on me last year. And then there are tomatoes in the back, and those are also squash. And then I was soaking peas because you want to soak pea seeds before you sow those.
Is it too late? Are we already too late for seed starting for the people that are interested in doing that, or certain varieties maybe?
Certain varieties, that's a very good question. So tomatoes, you're past the point now. So normally you want to start tomato seed in March for the north. I usually start mine by March 19th, but usually I try to go a little bit earlier than that. And then they get like right around now, I'm going to transplant them this weekend, and then they'll grow for another 4 weeks before I get them into the ground. So tomatoes are past the point. You could actually still start squash inside. There are a bunch of flowers you can still start. You could start zinnia inside. You could start, there's a lot of seeds actually you can start outdoors when there's no danger of frost. In fact, I normally start my zucchini and my summer squash and winter squash outside, like around May 14th. I'm a little south here, like 6B is not a bad zone. So we're like for New England, but yeah, like you can definitely still get plenty of yield out of plants that you plant directly outside, but tomatoes, unfortunately at this point, plan for next year. Think about what tomatoes you love, start collecting those seeds. But yes, for this year, tomatoes you'd have to be purchasing from hopefully a garden supply store near you, a nursery near you. This is also sort of to give an idea of like the makeshift nature of doing transplants. So I have transplant trays, but I usually start more tomatoes than I need, which is a problem. And anyway, then I have to move on to like these what are the other ways I can water from the bottom and have the pots, have them in pots, etc. So this is, you can see I've even got like a solo cup in the back there that I poked holes in the bottom. And then I just give them away to people. And this is an old photo with an old Instagram bad filter. And this is one year I did not have any transplant trays. And so I was like, okay, I've got cups and I'm going to use those, and that's how I'm going to do it. And that worked out fine. I still had tons and tons of tomatoes. So outdoor seed starting, lettuces are really easy to start outside. I just planted my arugula. I planted kale. I planted some bok choy, some mustard greens, and that you just do like broadcast seeding, which I'll show you an example of that, I think, on the next frame. Peas, beans, and corn, you can sow outside, no problem. You do want to soak peas before you start them. You could soak beans and corn before you start them. Corn requires a bit of space because you need multiple corn plants in order to get proper germination, and that might not be a good use if you do not have a lot of space. Like we don't ever plant corn here because it's just not worth it for us to take up that space. These are radish seeds that you see in this picture. So little radish sprouts, radish, carrots, beets, those are all easy to plant outdoors. Summer squashes, winter squashes, totally easy. This is what broadcast seeding looks like in actual practice. So there on the left, there's arugula, and then in the middle, there are mustard greens, and then there's some other kales and whatnot. And then there's a bunch of weeds in here. So I just wait for those to grow up, and so that they're more manageable for me to get at. And my husband, again, was like, that looks terrible. And I'm like, I'm not ripping those out until they're big because it's gonna make it easier on me. So buying plants, which is always a great option too. You do want to buy from your local nursery whenever possible. And this became really clear to me like 10 years ago. There was a problem here in Southeastern Mass, actually sort of generally in New England, with late blight, which is a disease that affects tomatoes and potato plants, and it will ruin the plants. So, and it will make your fruit inedible. So there was an outbreak of it here in New England, and a lot of it originated in the big box stores, is my understanding. So I think it's always good. And I know people who work in big box stores and they're doing a good job too, but it's, you know, your nursery people, the people who are running those plant shops around you, they're really into plants. So like, you know, they're going to be able to help you. They're going to be able to give advice. They're going to be able to direct you to a plant that you might not have thought of planting before. They're going to be able to give you tips on how to raise it, how to take good care of it. They're also going to make sure their plant stock is healthy because their reputations they're riding on that. Oh, so another thing, when you're looking at the little trays of plants, every once in a while I'll notice that I got some plant that like the 6th cell didn't have a plant in it. So just double check as you're going through. Okay, so this is, Karen and I really want to focus on this making a plan situation. So this is, you need to know how much space you have. If you have a back deck and you have some planters you want to plant into, if you have a space in your yard, whatever that is, you just want to determine, okay, this is where things are going to go. Then you want to make a list of like, I really want to have tomatoes. I really want to have zucchini. I love sunflowers. You know, what needs to be, I need to have basil. What needs to be in my garden? And then prioritize from there, like start thinking about like what space each of those things are going to need and prioritize. And so for instance, for us, I love broccoli. I eat tons of broccoli. I do not grow broccoli because broccoli for me takes up too much space. It doesn't have enough yield here and it's just not worth it. I'd rather have 1 million tomatoes than like 4 broccoli plants taking up a bunch of space that I can't, you know, that I only get like 3 nights dinners out of. Also figure out how much lead time you need to start your seeds indoors or when you can direct sow in your growing zone. You do want to know how big your plants are going to get. So this is a zucchini plant in my garden, and that back rail on the fence, you know, is like at 4-ish feet. So they can get big. You can plant zucchini and you can plant tomatoes in containers. It's just you need to have a nice big container for them. It can be like one of those half barrels, those half round barrels. That will work. You won't get probably the size, but you will still get a nice big plant. This is me, in case you couldn't tell, with my tomatoes last year. I'm 5'6". Those are my tomatoes in July, and they're not red yet, so it's like mid-July. So you can see they get pretty big. This is also, we have all this extra chicken wire around all the plants because we had a problem with our woodchuck friend last year. Wasn't good. So in this other picture on the upper right, you can see eggplant. Those are a good small space crop because they don't need a bunch of space. This is another crazy zucchini situation that I had last year that I thought was a good idea, but that was an Italian variety and it crept out all over the garden, which I think is fun. But so Karen made a drawing of her garden space, which is a really brilliant idea, right? So you know, like, okay, I'm gonna put my peppers are all gonna go over here, my tomatoes are over here, my zucchinis over here, cucumbers, I'm guessing, right, Karen?
Yep, cucumbers, cherry tomatoes on the opposite side, and
yep.
Those are green beans. There's the fence on the bottom. So the green beans grow up the fence. And more so because for me, when the plants are smaller, I don't remember what they are. And sometimes the little tags don't always stay depending on watering or my kids or whatever it might be. So this was my makeshift quick. How are we going to remember what's where while it's in the younger phase or stage of growing? So, yep.
And that is all you need. Like, you don't need to be making yourself like a Renaissance painting of what your garden's going to look like. It's just knowing and just having a code that you can decipher is all you need. Another thing I like to do when I'm planning is sort of know when I'm going to be able to eat the next thing. So I go from like, okay, my asparagus is up now. I'm going to get my zucchini in so that hopefully the transition happens between, the asparagus is going to start to fall by the wayside, and then I'm going to still be able to eat zucchini because I know I can't have any tomatoes until July 29th, right? But that's like if you're really dorking out a bit. So this is, again, I'm going to repeat. just enlist help, have family members help you out with stuff. You know, you don't even have to plant everything in one day. You can be like, you know what, today we're going to put the peppers in. And in 2 days, we're going to put the tomatoes in. And then in another couple days, we're going to put the green beans in. You don't need to do it all in one day. It's like just incremental. Everything can be done incrementally.
And one thing I'd like to add in, because I get a lot of requests from people like, how do I get my kids to eat vegetables? And also, how do I get my husband or my wife or my partner to eat vegetables? And I think gardening, or even starting with just one thing that you can go to the store and grow together, having people like put the work in to grow that one thing and then actually have the satisfaction of like, wow, I grew this, whether from a seed or a plant. And then, you know, they still might not like it that season, but it's a step in the right direction. And I think that there's so much to learn from gardening and knowing that you can still kind of make it whatever you want, you know? So
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. The other thing, and I think like once you, right, when you care for something, I know it's like when you get the pet for your kids and they're like, yeah, I'm going to take care of it. And you're like, oh no, I'm going to be walking this dog at 4 a.m. I know what's going to happen. So like, we all know that, but there is still an investment, right? That your kid is learning, like, I need to take care of this little animal. I'm responsible. The responsibility is huge. So when you're, you know, you're like, okay, it's your turn to water the peas. Like, I water the peas. I did that. You know, or like seeing it from when it's a little sprout to like all of a sudden, no, we're going to saute this. So we're going to eat this thing tonight. You know, it's cool. And then different, I mean, we're all used to the things that we get in the grocery store, and you know, it's like the generic, this is a tomato and this is a carrot and this is lettuce, but there are a bunch of different varieties too of all these different plants, as I mentioned earlier. So you can get like really interesting backstories on different vegetables and fruits and such. Like, we have some apple trees here in the yard that are from, you know, like colonial times. So we have like one that's from Roxbury. It's called Roxbury russet. So, you know, it's just like this plant has been in this country since people settled here, you know, colonial people settled here. So it's just it can be interesting, like story time, history. There's a lot that goes into gardening and agriculture that is a lot of different disciplines, really. So a good way for kids to get involved and learn different things about history and agriculture and responsibility. Okay, so again, we've talked about avoiding overwhelm. I feel like I have overwhelmed you with talking about avoiding overwhelm, so we will skip that. And then, so tomatoes. So Angela, I know you were talking about you want to plant a tomato plant this year. So for this year, I would say, you know, go to your local garden center. They will have a great selection of tomatoes, and pick out a nice, healthy looking plant that, which they probably all will be because it's at the garden center. And so this is where I just wanted to reiterate, like, I do start my tomato seeds each year around March 15th. I will tell you, sometimes in February, March are not my months. Not a good time for me. I don't like darkness, I don't like winter. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I gotta plant the tomato seeds. And, you know, eventually, like, you just do it. So you're like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then, you know, right around now, you're transplanting them to a bigger pot. And then you're going to transplant them into the garden in the middle to end of May. And like I'm saying, it's like 4.5 months before you're going to get that first full-size red tomato from the time you plant the seed to the time you're harvesting. So just something to consider. And so we've already seen this image, but when you are planting, you want to make sure that you're burying the plant in, so that like even those little leaves down at the very bottom, those don't need to be above the earth, because tomatoes will send out roots from any point on their stem. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen a tomato plant fall over on its side, and like the part that goes down starts to grow roots. They will project roots from any part of their stem that hits the soil. And that gives you, you know, really nice system. It keeps them nice and sturdy and healthy. When planting tomatoes, I do like to use a tomato fertilizer, and I get mine at gardeners.com. They're based in Vermont. They're employee owned. They have a lot of great products. So you do want to amend the soil a little bit. And this is mine in a tomato cage. I do use tomato cages for support because they get so big. And so that way they can just, you know, their leaves and branches can go off the side. And also tomatoes can lean on those, and it keeps them upright. Oh goodness, are we already there? All right, we're already at resources. there are so many great seed sources actually just here in New England. So High Mowing Seeds is fantastic. You can get them through their website. You can also get them through gardeners.com. Johnny's Seeds in Maine is like, they have so much, like their flower selection, which flowers right now, you could be buying flowers, and we're 5 or 6 weeks out. You could definitely start flowers in the 4 to 6 week range and get those out into your garden. Seed Savers Exchange is based in the Midwest, but they have a bunch of heirloom seeds, and they started with like a community of seed savers. So people will, Joe from New Jersey sent in his tomato seeds that his mother brought with her from Italy, and then they've grown them and then they sell them. Or they're like, oh, we have this squash that started in Waltham, Massachusetts, and so sent us the squash seeds. Baker Creek is down in Missouri. They have a ton of interesting varieties. They obviously have a lot for southern gardening. Rose 7 Seeds is chef-centric, so I have bought a number of different seeds from them. They're a little experimental, and they're owned by this chef named Dan Barber of Blue Hills at Stone Barns. So he's like a fancy New York City chef, and he started this whole program. And so row 7 is like, this is the row we can sell. They have things that are like, they have a not hot habanero pepper. They have the peas that I'm growing, actually I got from them. They have some butternut squash. So they have some interesting varieties. Seeds from Italy is Franchi. Sorry, I was gonna say Fistacci, which is nuts. They're a distributor of Franchi seeds from Italy, so you could get Italian varieties from them. Monticello down in Virginia, Thomas Jefferson's home, they have a bunch of heirloom seeds there that range from vegetables to to flowers. And Burpee, which I know is really obvious, but Burpee, in fact, High Mowing is selling a variety from Burpee. I think it might be their butternut even, or Fort Hook Giant. So anyway, Burpee, I've been to their facility, and it's really amazing. And so don't rule them out of your seed spending or your seed purchasing. They have a lot of great stuff. And then supplies and reference. So Johnny's Seeds, again, they have a bunch of different gardening supplies, as does Gardener Supply. Women's work is women owned, and I really love their products. But so these gloves are theirs, and this is a signature print of theirs. But everything is, they have men's product, they have men's gloves and such too, but they have things that are sized for women's hands, which is nice. Because a lot of times we women have to, we're struggling with the giant like clown hand gloves. Sean, it's not easy, I'm telling you. So your local garden center, of course, they're always going to be able to hook you up. And then so we've talked about the zone map, and that's the link for that. Royal Horticultural Society is always a good reference site. I happen to really like P. Allen Smith. So he posted this video on his Instagram yesterday, I think. They have over 1 million daffodils at his farm. It's amazing, amazing. And then your county extensions for soil analysis, you can reach out. There's a link to a list here for all states, but for Mass, it's UMass, and for New Hampshire, it's UNH.
And we can get you all these lists that Amy's put together. So if you'd like copies of this, to try getting seeds or tools or something, because ultimately I think another thing to point out with seeds is if you get them and they don't work, I'm sure some of them are expensive, but it's not like you've put this huge endeavor into something, right? Like
Absolutely.
Sometimes we start something and it's a huge investment of time, equipment, whatever it might be. And then it's like, oh, I realized I didn't like it. And, if you get a bucket and some dirt and some seeds, it's not, or no bucket, you just use whatever land you have and see if it works. And it's not, if it doesn't work, you can try again, or you could be like, nope, I didn't like it. I'll just keep getting my veggies at the farmer's market.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Karen, because I think, so seeds in general, you're not going to spend more than $4 for a seed pack. And in many cases, you're going to spend between like $2.50 and like $3.95, $4. So it's not a huge investment. You can try it out, and if you're like, well, that was terrible, I did not enjoy that at all, you might be out like $15. Who cares, right? You're like, you tried. Or you might be like, like I saw this, so there's this woman who writes for the Washington Post. She writes a food column, and her name is Tamar Haspel. She lives on the Cape, and she yesterday was posting to social media. She's like, "Can I plant these tulip bulbs now?" And people were like, "Well, I find that the squirrels eat them if you plant them in the spring, or if you eat them or you plant them in the fall. It doesn't much matter." But she was like, and I thought this was a good thing. She said, she was like, I found that in gardening, as with many other things in life, you try it and usually it works out okay. Like now is not the time to be planting tulip bulbs, but you can try. They might come up next year. Who knows? Like it's what, just try.
Yep.
So then I have, look, we show up again. Here are the two of us again. But yes, keep in touch with us. If you'd like, you can hit me up at on Instagram, or you can email Amy at tinyfarmhouse.com. And I think we'll open it up to any questions.